Mark is here. Fucking A. Let's go to Mark. We are joined with the one and only Mark Sleboda, Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. You can see it in the background. Mark is international relations and security analyst. You can check Mark out on Boosty, on Real Politic with Mark Sleboda, or just Mark Sleboda. Both of those things will bring him up. Mark, how you doing, my man? You doing okay today?
Tomorrow, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's
Mark.
always an honor and pleasure to be on the show.
Oh, man, it's always an honor and a pleasure to have you. And I mean that sincerely. Donald Trump had a phone call with Vladimir Putin. And is it me, or is it become very clear that Russia does not really care what Trump wants? And I suppose this breaks down into 2 points. Either Trump doesn't have control of his government, or Trump does and he's a flaming liar, or a combination of both. And in which cases, you can't really care about what the US president is saying anyway. Give me your thoughts on this. And because in the phone call, he made it very clear, like, look, we're not giving up our interests. And considering over the last several days, it was like 800, 900 drone, air, hypersonic missile attacks hitting all of these various places in Kiev and all across Ukraine. Well, it becomes pretty clear that Russia is not taking any. It seems that all the notions of negotiations have gone. This is about unconditional surrender. Give me your thoughts on this, though.
Yeah, I think what you suggested, the latter, is the case, that he both has no control over his government and he is a liar. I mean, I believe that Donald Trump is one of those people, playing pop psychology here, that is capable of being perfectly sincere about something and then talking to someone else and 15 minutes later taking a perfectly sincere position 180 degrees or 360 and a Baerbock degrees opposite of that position. But I mean, that's a liar. I mean, so this phone call, it followed on a phone call by Macron to Putin, which was the first time they had spoken in 3 years. And a few days later, we had this phone call. I mean, we don't know who initiated, but I mean, it seems pretty clear it was Trump called Putin. And as has become standard under the Trump regime, that they do not release a readout of their of the president's phone calls with other countries, right? Which is a summary and a spin, a narrative on what they talked about. Instead, what we have become accustomed to is quite often Trump will himself make a Truth Social post, which gives the Trumpist version of the conversation. It must be said, of course, in Donald Trump style, often in the crudest and most childish terms, bragging, boasting, and in screaming all capital letters when necessary.
Yes.
It's interesting that we didn't get any of that this time, right? There was nothing. Trump, from what we can tell, was so frustrated and so furious and so upset about, shall we say, his position at the end of the call that he didn't even make a Truth Social post. What instead we got after was a few passing comments to the press when asked about it. And he said at various times he was extremely unhappy. He was disappointed. No progress has been made. I think Putin wants to go all the way on this one, and he's not there. Meaning he's not. Yeah, I mean, which Putin has made perfectly clear. He's not going to agree to an unconditional ceasefire to presumably end this conflict on American terms. I'm sure that Putin was still more or less unfailingly polite. We know that the conversation because what we know of the conversation comes from the Russian side. And as has become Russia's standard when receiving phone calls from the U.S. now, since the U.S. does not put out an official readout, the Kremlin also does not put out an official readout. But what they have been doing is instead we're getting comments on the phone call from Yuri Ushakov, whom is Putin's foreign policy advisor, and whom is, I think we can generally assume, is listening in on any phone call that Trump and Putin have together, just like there's Americans listening in on their side. What we know first is that Donald Trump bragged to Putin about passing his big, beautiful bill in the United States. As if Putin gives a flying F, right? I mean,
too funny.
I don't, okay. I mean, it is a typically American centric to think that they're somehow what goes on in their petty domestic politics is of utmost importance to the rest of the world. It's really not. But I'm sure Putin again was on how very nice for you, Donald. Was there anything else? We know that they also talked about Iran, and I can't imagine there was there was dancing around each other in that particular position there. Now Russia. The official position is that the Russian government doesn't want Iran to acquire nuclear weapons either, but Putin condemned the unprovoked act of aggression by Israel and by the United States on their strategic partner Iran, and made clear that if the U.S. wants to have discussions with Iran about their civilian nuclear enrichment program, which has been monitored by the International Atomic Energy, then diplomacy is the only proper way to do that. Other than that, I mean, there was a few really, shall we say, filler items in the conversation. Putin suggested that Russia and the U.S. Have a joint film festival highlighting conservative values, tradition. Not it wasn't termed conservative. Term traditional values. Now, I am quite sure that this was something that the Kremlin's, shall we say, psychological profilers came up with as a non-item that might, be emotionally appealing to Trump, right? Because this is, in other words, a subtle form of buttering up and manipulation, Kremlin style. I think that's how we can consider that, right? I mean, I'm sure they would go ahead and do it if there was any really evidence, but I mean, I quite honestly can't see this happening. It's just like, like I said, filler conversation that is meant to soften the rest of the blow of this conversation to Trump. They talked about business opportunities. Oh, how much money Americans could make investing in development and resources in Russia, as has become standard. Again, not because this would be a normal presidential level discussion that Putin would necessarily have with any other leader, especially in such vague terms, but this is a way that they know this type of business-centric conversation pleases Trump, right? So they talk, they use any excuse to bring it up. Finally, they got to the issue of Ukraine, and it was not said out. It was said that Trump, again requested an immediate end to hostilities, which is another way of saying that he demanded an unconditional ceasefire. And it wasn't said outright by Ushakov, but if you're reading between the lines and what Trump talked about afterwards about sanctions, that he almost certainly threatened Putin with sanctions unless he agreed to the unconditional ceasefire.
Right.
I think that the Pentagons, right, the Trump administrations, because of course the Pentagon didn't do it without Trump's permission, but their decision to temporarily suspend the delivery of a certain number, a certain type of missiles and munitions to the Kiev regime, ostensibly because the Pentagon needs to conduct an audit and an assessment of where their inventories are, i.e., the U.S. is out of, right? The Pentagon is really, they've wasted far too many on this conflict, and of course against the Houthis and defending Israel. But Patriot interceptors first and foremost, but also 155 millimeter artillery rounds, guided multiple launch rocket system missiles, Hellfire missiles, which are an air-to-surface missile for the F-16s. Stingers, and a few others, right? We've all heard about this, and this has become a bit of a political controversy in the United States. But at the end of the day, the reality is that the Pentagon is out, and the U.S. military-industrial complex has not been able to ramp up production of these items, particularly the air defense missiles, that can't even come close to meeting the Kiev regime in Ukraine's needs, much less their needs, plus Israel needs, plus U.S. needs, plus all the other countries out there that use the Patriot system and so forth. So essentially, Russia has attrited the United States, right, of a lot of the key munitions that were in this conflict. Now, I believe that Trump hoped that this would be seen as a political gesture because towards a ceasefire. Because, I mean, I have no doubt that they really did this because they're short on inventory. But I think someone probably came up, hey, we can sell this to Putin as a gesture in his direction towards his demands, because Russia's demands for a ceasefire, a conditional ceasefire, made now consistent over more than a year. One of them is that the West must cease all military supplies. All of the West must cease all military supplies to the Kiev regime in Ukraine and stop all military intelligence sharing. And this was, of course, part of that because Trump also made clear, the Trump administration made clear that this suspension of these types of munitions does not mean the end of military support, that other types of military supplies would continue to be delivered to Ukraine, that military intelligence sharing would continue. And obviously Europe is not, going to stop supplying weapons. So Putin said, hey, Vladimir, I'm doing this, right? You wanted this, and then, that's really nice, but our demand is a lot more than just that, and the answer is still no. Then it became, well, if you don't, I'm going to sanction you, and it seems pretty clear that Putin probably said something along the lines of, you do what you have to do, Donald, right? And afterwards, Trump has made comments that Putin knows that new sanctions are probably coming, but that he is professional. And he seemed to say that Russia doesn't really care, but then he's like, but these sanctions will be really biting, right? And what he's almost certainly talking about is Lindsey Graham's bone-crushing sanctions bill in the Senate that he's been waving around like a lunatic for several months now, which isn't really sanctions against Russia at all.
China.
It's secondary sanctions. It's sanctions against any other country who dares to continue to trade with Russia, particularly, of course, in energy, which means primarily China, India, also countries like Turkey and even Saudi Arabia has been buying large amounts of Russian energy and then reselling it on to other people at a markup. But obviously this would ruin U.S. relations with these countries, right? Trump supposedly, we don't know any details at all yet that I've heard, but supposedly just came to a deal, a trade deal with China, not at least according to Trump.
It's a framework.
It's a framework.
None of
Okay.
it is framework.
India, of course, is at various times against China considered a U.S. ally, and the U.S. is traditionally rather loath to push India on things like this because they don't want India, going too far. And India has made clear that they're not going to bow to any sanctions on their economy, that they are a sovereign country, that they don't agree with these sanctions. They're not going to fulfill them. And even under threat of tariffs or sanctions or anything, that's not going to happen. And of course, Turkey, again, Erdogan is a rather quixotic and mercurial member of NATO who has his trademark is playing both sides of every fence and betraying everyone, backstabbing everyone on every side of that fence, playing Turkey's crucial geopolitical crux position for everything it's worth, cashing far more checks than Turkey's geopolitical worth has in terms of geopolitical worth. But thus far, he's gotten away from it. But anyway, obviously the U.S. doesn't want to do that either. So the bottom line is that Russia doesn't believe that these threats are serious, and if they are, they'll push global energy prices because of the disruption of the markets so high that will quite obviously have a blowback effect on the U.S. economy, the price of oil and thus gasoline, and thus everything in the United States because of the way the U.S. distribution system works and inflation. And Trump has, always shown at least a political understanding of what high oil prices means for him, particularly when I'm sure about right now he's starting to really think about midterm elections and maintaining majorities in both houses of Congress to continue to push his big, beautiful bills through the U.S. Congress. So essentially, Putin is saying that, we're not saying that your sanctions will have no effect, but we'll weather them. We'll get around them like we have with the 26,000 other sanctions that have been leveled on us by you and the rest of the West. And very specifically, the words that Yuri Ushakov used in the readout is Russia will not back down. Back down. Very specific words in the English readout, right? Towards the accomplishment of its goals in the special military operation. Those are strong words. And to me, the use of those words indicates that threats were made and Putin said, no, I don't care. So, that's where we come out. And we're already several days on, and we haven't heard any new announcement on any change, any committed change in that policy of supplying missiles and munitions. Evidently, vague words were sent to Zelensky. We'll try to get you some type of air defense in the conversation that Trump and Zelensky then had afterwards, but nothing has formalized because the U.S. simply doesn't have it to give. It's the U.S.'s Achilles heel of their military right now, air defense interceptors. There's been no word, other than vague statements by Trump, nothing firm on sanctions either. So for the moment, once again, there has not come the crisis moment when Putin continues to say no to Trump's demands. But we must imagine that one of two scenarios will eventually emerge. Either Trump will have to punish Putin for not saving the U.S. proxy regime in Kiev, or not, stopping the special military operation against it. Be that sanctions, real sanctions, token sanctions, military supplies, escalation, whatever. Right, essentially continuing, turning back to the Biden policy, right, or walking away because he doesn't have many other options. And those punishment options, it must be said, are almost certainly not going to they're almost certainly not going to change Russia's, direction, and they will almost certainly have very little even operational effect, economically or militarily on Russia.
No, it'll be a self-inflicted wound like in Europe.
And this is why I think Trump is being, for Trump, extremely quiet about all of this, is because he doesn't like to lose. And in this situation, as he has, outright said before, Putin has all the cards, right? He said that in context of Zelensky, but of course it's also true to him. And Trump likes to win. He likes to boast. He likes to brag. He likes to take credit for solving conflicts all over the world that he had nothing to do with, either in their, maybe in their instigation, but certainly not in their conclusion, or at least cessation. And he can't get that here. How do you spin? Vladimir Putin told me to,
pound sand.
Yeah, pound sand. Yeah, even better.
Yeah, it's funny to me because the media doesn't quite seem to get that. Like the media in the U.S. it should be obvious that the U.S. really has no cards in this. Like meaning they're short of going to nuclear war, that they can't do anything in this situation. And yet the media is like, hey, Trump, why are you letting Putin get away with this? So like, what do you expect them to do? Right? You lost. They can't accept a loss for a loss.
They can't accept the media, the mainstream media in the U.S., they call it the fourth estate, right? Because it is a part of the U.S. political regime, right? It is an actor. It is both a political actor and it is an ideological actor. And they have played the role of whip in this conflict from the very beginning, publicly going after and goading, Biden's officials, now Trump's officials, anytime, there wasn't an escalation in response to Russia continuing to win, right? And to defy the U.S. on this. Again and again and again, they have been the gadfly, right? Whipping this conflict along, right? Usually, pushing the not just the U.S. but other Western politicians as well to the next escalation when the last one didn't work almost immediately. And they, at the same time as they, however grudgingly, occasionally admit that Russia is outproducing the entirety of the West, as Mark Rutte continues to harp on, by 4 times in the type of munitions and military gear needed for this conflict. That is, they produce more in 3 months than the entirety of NATO does in a year, right? He keeps saying this. They keep admitting the shortages that the U.S. has on air defense interceptor missiles and a host of other munitions. They've even admitted at various times about the performance issues, right, of the Patriot, right, of U.S. air defense, of the problems with the THAAD system and all of these other things. And at times, they have even admitted that Russia is winning on the battlefield, that their production is continuing. But they, as much as they admit these things, they're still not allowed to change the narrative because at its heart, the media can't accept these facts. They still have a belief that the U.S. has unlimited military capability to force its will anywhere, anytime, everywhere on the U.S. world. And this is, I believe, a result of, shall we say, a continued hangover from the unipolar moment, right? From the 90s, the early 2000s, that period of unrivaled. And they haven't come to grips with that relative decline in U.S. military potential. And that is the same thing in economic terms. They can't come to grips with the fact that Russia, whose economy they have mocked and every half a year for the last 20 years, you can find the articles in the U.S. media by luminaries, right? You know, in the field, right, about how Russia's economy is about to collapse and how it's all house of cards and it's all corrupt and they make nothing. And Obama himself, Russia doesn't make anything, right? You know, so they've mocked, and here they have Russia not only defying all of these sanctions, all of the economic pressure, their control, their weaponization of the global financial architecture against Russia, right? Russia shrugs all of it off, continues to defy the U.S. Its economy grows faster, and they're still able to completely outproduce not just the U.S., but all of the West, and I mean all of NATO and the collective West, and whoever else they're able to grab weapons off of across the world, you know, multiple times over. Russia's able to outproduce that in military industrial terms. Again, for the specifics of what is needed for this type of land-centric conflict. They just can't come to grips with it. It would question American exceptionalism. It would question their identity, what the U.S.'s place in the world. So while they can occasionally acknowledge these facts, it still hasn't been allowed to change the overall narrative, because that would mean, you know, a challenge to their identity, to their view of, you know, the U.S. role, who they are, what the U.S. is, and what the U.S. role in the world is. They can't come to grips with that yet.
Yeah, they can state the facts. They just can't state what the facts really mean, if that makes sense.
Yep.
It's like we can acknowledge this. We just can't acknowledge contextually what it means.
They can't acknowledge what we've been saying for several years now ad nauseum, right? Several times a week.
Yeah. Just mind-blowing. It always shocks me. It always shocks me. It's like, hey, Trump, why are you letting Putin get away with this? Or Putin and Trump talks and Putin escalates. And it's like, dude, he can't do anything. It's like, what is wrong with you people?
What do you mean? We're the United States. If we only have the political will, we can do anything, right? I mean, that's
not reality.
They still tell themselves, right?
It's not the reality of events. What's going on the ground? Because I have watched Russia unleash a hell of a bombing campaign. Kim Jong missiles in some cases. I think it was like 800, if not 900, over the course of the last couple of days.
Yeah, 2 days. Yeah, close to 900 drones.
Yeah, an astonishing amount of weaponry being employed all across Ukraine, including hidden recruitment centers, which apparently people, Ukrainians on Telegram applauded.
I was going to bring that up. Thank you.
Yeah, I can show you the post if you want. It's the funniest thing in the world. They're like, yes.
Yes.
Do it.
So, yeah, Russia's long range, it has to be said that the Kiev regime is making long range strikes as well, right? So the nightly exchange of drones and missiles on both sides continues. In fact, the Ukraine side did lob some missiles in the last week, right? Which, you know, they haven't always done. And it has not become clear. There's arguments among military analysts yet what type of missiles they fired. Were they Storm Shadows? Were they Scalps? Were they Taurus? Were they some supposedly Ukrainian domestic production, right? Which might mean Taurus with a made in Ukraine stamp put on it in Ukraine, right? Something like that. We don't know. But they've scored a few hits, right? They still get their licks in. The majority are stopped by Russian air defense and electronic warfare, drones or missiles. But no system, even the best system in the world, which is Russia's, is perfect. But I mean, they killed a general in Kursk last week, the deputy chief of the Navy in a missile strike in the Kursk region, I believe. They got an attack early last week in Izhevsk. Izhevsk is in south central Russia. It is 1,300 kilometers from the contact line. And they hit a military industrial factory there, facility, that was, from what the reports I've read, is involved in the production of the Tor short-range air defense system, something that has proven extremely effective in the SMO, one of the unheralded weapons, shall we say, particularly in its use against drones just like this, right? But of course, this was where they're made, not, also, they may have also done some missile components for missile production. Now, I did see
Can I interrupt you
videos
real quick
of,
while this is on my mind? Do they really believe that came from Ukraine?
That's the most important thing about this. That's the most important thing. No, they don't. They don't believe it came from Ukraine at all. I saw some videos that obviously Russian air defense was active around that facility. They did have air defense, and they did bring some things down. We don't know how many got through. At least one got through, and a fire was started on the facility. Now, my understanding is that it was not catastrophic, that it did damage, but it's damage that can be repaired. But 3 people were killed and 20 were injured, right? Factory workers, almost certainly. Now, of course, that's a legitimate target. It's military industrial. I would never suggest otherwise. But the big question is, where did this attack come from? And there has not been a definitive answer from the Ministry of Defense yet. But the consensus of Russian military analysts is that it came out of Kazakhstani airspace, because Kazakhstan is not far from this facility. Now, Kazakhstan is largely a big, empty country, right? Small population, big, lots of wilderness, lots of steppe. Now, there's no suggestion that Kazakhstan allowed this attack out of its territory. This is almost certainly another condition of this type of asymmetric operation spiderweb of trucks packed with drones into the country and either fired out of the trucks or some, drone HQ, temporary HQ set up in some isolated location, then used to fire these off, then pack them up and, get out of Dodge, right? I mean, that is almost certainly the situation. So the consensus is that this was a smaller operation spiderweb type attack again. And the takeaways are that obviously with the partial success that they had with that, they are planning to continue such type of asymmetric attacks, which, of course, anything that they have success with, they should in military terms. But that also the big takeaway for Russia should again be, if it hasn't gotten through, that there's no place in Russia, no matter how big Russia is, and Russia's big, that is completely safe, right? That they are in a war, that any place in Russia can be reached out and touched under the right terms and conditions, right? No matter how far they are from the contact line. That's simple, a truth of this conflict, and increasingly a point that every country in the world should be paying attention to. I did a whole special in focus video on the implications of container warfare, containers packed with drones and missiles, and that every country was preparing for their use, every country with capabilities, but that it's the Kiev regime, backed by the US and the UK and maybe Israel as well, who knows, that finally opened that Pandora's box. But that precedent is going to continue. And when you consider the military and economic consequences, that essentially any state actor or non-state actor of even middling capability that can pack a cargo container with drones or missiles can strike practically anywhere in the world, giving them long-range strike capability at the most sensitive economic, military, and political locations. And the fact that every major port in the world handles thousands, if not tens of thousands of these containers every day, right? There's close to 20,000 of these that just go through the port at LA every day, right? I did a in focus video on this for the exclusive content on my Boosty page right after the Operation Spiderweb. And the consensus is that this is another episode already of that. And that, again, it has huge global, not just for this conflict, but for every conflict. This has big securitization and economic consequences moving forward. It's a new Pandora's box. It's a new precedent. It's been theorized for over a decade now. You can find plenty of things on container warfare, right? Serious military journals and serious journalistic pieces online. Now the Pandora's box has finally been opened, and it achieved at least partial success, which means everyone's going to be, if they weren't taking a look at it, they're certainly taking a look at it now. So that is, an example of how they're still getting their licks in, right? Now, that being said, they are being ground back all along the contact line, and Russia's long-range strikes every night are much larger, much more effective, much more damaging, and the Kiev regime now effectively has no air defense whatsoever. I saw a video, I posted it again on my page, on one of my shows in the last week, of a video that Reuters put out or taped back on June 23rd. So already, more than 2 weeks ago. But because we don't get a lot of video, certainly not good video, of what happens in Kiev during Russian strikes, because the Kiev regime has made those videos, illegal. Right? If anyone posts videos, that's seen as aiding the enemy in damage assessment or propaganda, and it's certainly refuting their propaganda of what's happening. Scenes like that, and that's what you saw in this video, and it happened again and again and again, and there was no effect. I mean, you heard some short-range air defense, like heavy machine guns or something, occasionally firing in the distance, but obviously to no effect whatsoever. You didn't see any Patriots. You didn't see any missile air defense, nothing like that. It was just impact after impact after impact. And these of Russia's new improved Gurans with the much larger payload, jet powered, flying at high altitude, and then coming down very sharp on target, so that there's almost no ability to bring them down. And Russia's Iskanders and Kinjals and everything as well. So huge attacks. And now we've seen the first nights that Russia has launched more than 500 Guran drones in a night. And we've already heard for months now that the Kiev regime, Zelensky himself said that Russia will soon be producing 500 Gurans a day, which means
equilibrium.
It also means that they can launch, of course, 500 a day. right. And that the Ukrainian intelligence reported last week that they expect that number to rise to 700 a day by the autumn, and potentially up to 1,000 a day by the end of the year, because Russian production hasn't reached a peak. They're still increasing and increasing and increasing. And Russia's drones like this, the Guran, is getting better and better in evolutionary terms. And there's just a weight here. There's a weight to Russia's superior military industrial capability, not only over the Kiev regime, but over all of the West. And I'm sorry, whatever they may claim otherwise, there's a weight to the fact that Russia's weapons, in terms of this combat at least, are better, right? They can produce in greater quantity. They're more efficient. They're cheaper to make. So all of this is having an increasing, weight behind the scenes. In fact, they have so many Garans now that they're no longer just using them in a long-range strike capability, that is to say strategic, against military-industrial facilities, against weapons depots, against electrical infrastructure. Now, Russia has started using them just behind the contact line in the Kiev regime's operational rear to essentially rape their logistics, right? They're now using them in this operational role. They previously, I mean, Russia already has good capability. They regularly use their FABs and their CAB glide bombs in this capacity. Well, now they've got more choice. And we see Garans because they've got more than they know what to do with yet. And that's not an exaggeration. This was actually something said at the end of last year by the German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, that Russia is producing far more than it's using or needs right now for the special military operation, and that it is actually stocking its weapons warehouses. It's producing more than it needs. Right now, again, that's on certain military things. But the point is, the West's cupboards are bare, and Russia's cupboards are pouring